Have you ever stopped to think about how your everyday life might look to a total stranger? Sometimes the things we see every day, the stuff we completely take for granted, are the most fascinating things in the world to an outsider. Today, we're going to look at history through the eyes of three very different travelers who visited the Indian subcontinent centuries ago.
I mean, just look at these. A coconut and some palm leaves. For a lot of people, they're just part of life. But for those early visitors, whoa, these were totally new, totally remarkable discoveries. They wrote about them in their journals in great detail. It's the perfect example of how an outside perspective can make the ordinary seem extraordinary.
And that's really the heart of it, isn't it? Travelers notice all the little things, the customs, the daily routines that locals might not even think to write down. Their accounts give us this unique, almost unfiltered peek into the social world of the past. It's that very difference in what they see that makes their stories so incredibly valuable to us.
So, let's meet our guys. We're about to dive into the journeys of three men from totally different backgrounds, different centuries, and each one came with their own reason for traveling and their own unique way of seeing the world.
First up, all the way from the 11th century, we have Al-Biruni. You can think of him as the meticulous scholar, the academic, the guy who came not to conquer or trade, but to learn, to understand, and to document everything.
Then, we jump forward 3 centuries and meet Ibn Battuta. Now, this guy was no bookworm. He was the ultimate adventurer. For him, real knowledge didn't come from a library. It came from hitting the road and seeing the world with his own 2 eyes. And finally, from the 17th century, we have François Bernier. He was a French doctor and philosopher who spent years in the Mughal court. And his perspective, well, it was that of a critic. He was constantly comparing everything he saw in India to his home back in Europe.
Okay, let's start with our first lens, the methodical scholar Al-Biruni. It's a fascinating story. I mean, how does a man who shows up in the region as a hostage end up writing one of the most comprehensive books ever on its culture? Well, Al-Biruni's journey started in the most unlikely way imaginable. In 1017, he was brought to Ghazni as a hostage. But this was no ordinary captive. Al-Biruni was a genius, a polymath. Instead of despairing, he became captivated by the culture around him. He spent years with Brahmana priests and scholars, and even learned Sanskrit, which is no easy task, just so he could read their religious and philosophical texts for himself. His approach wasn't about adventure, it was purely academic.
And you don't have to guess his motivation. He tells us right here. In his masterpiece, the Kitab-ul-Hind, he says he wrote it to be a guide for others. He wasn't there to judge or to romanticize, he was there to explain. His work is this incredibly structured, almost mathematical breakdown of Indian society, all for an outside audience.
Now let's do a complete 180. We're going to jump ahead 3 centuries. After the scholar Al-Biruni documented India through its books, our next traveler arrived to understand it through its roads. Meet Ibn Battuta, a man who believed true knowledge only came from lived experience. I mean, seriously, what a line. This quote just perfectly captures his whole spirit. He left home when he was only 22, not for some academic research project, but because he was driven by what he called an overmastering impulse. This was a guy who was just moved by a deep desire to see the world, not just read about it.
And man, did he see the world. Before he even got to India in 1333, he had already trekked through Syria, Iraq, Persia, and parts of East Africa. His journey was just epic in scale, spanning entire continents in an age when travel was anything but easy.
And his time in India was a total whirlwind. He gets to Sindh, makes his way to Delhi, and somehow impresses the Sultan so much that he's made a judge. He does that for years, then he falls out of favor, gets thrown in jail for a bit, before getting reinstated and sent as the Sultan's envoy to China. He finally got back home to Morocco almost 30 years after he left. Just what a life!
But we really can't overstate how brutal this kind of travel was. This wasn't some comfy bus tour, Journeys were measured in weeks and months, all on foot or on horseback. It was grueling.
Take the trip from Sindh to Delhi. This number you're looking at? 50. That's how many days it took to make that journey. 50 days.
Or how about this one? 40 days just to get from Daulatabad back to Delhi. Imagine spending more than a month on the road for just one leg of your trip.
And the long distances weren't even the only problem. As this reminds us, there was the constant looming threat of attack. Highway robbers were just a fact of life on the road. In fact, Ibn Battuta's own caravan was attacked on the way from Multan to Delhi.
A bunch of his companions were killed, and he was incredibly lucky to have survived.
Okay, let's fast forward one last time to the 17th century and meet our third traveler. This guy brought a completely different lens to the table. François Bernier came to India not just to see it, but to compare it.
So Bernier was a French doctor and intellectual who landed himself in this incredible position. He was the personal physician to a Mughal prince. He spent 12 years in India, but his frame of reference and the audience he was writing for were always back in Europe, specifically the court of King Louis XIV of France. And this right here is the absolute key to understanding his writings. He wasn't just describing what he saw, he was constantly measuring it against his European benchmark. He framed Mughal India as stagnant, despotic, a bleak situation when he compared it to what he saw as the progress happening in France. This wasn't just a neutral observation, it was an argument designed to show Europe as superior.
So we have the scholar, the adventurer, and the critic. What's truly fascinating is thinking about how these individual, deeply personal accounts actually went on to shape history itself.
And this is where Bernier's story had a massive impact: the printing press. See, earlier travelogues were hand-copied manuscripts, so they didn't spread very far. But Bernier's work, it was published, then quickly translated and reprinted all over Europe. Suddenly, his critical and, let's be honest, often biased comparisons weren't just one man's opinion anymore. They became the definitive, widely accepted image of India for generations of Europeans.
So in the end, we have one history seen through three really powerful, but very different lenses. We've got the scholar's deep analysis, the adventurer's incredible stories, and the critic's influential comparisons. None of them, on their own, hold the complete truth. But when you put them together, these personal and, biased accounts, they give us a much richer, more complex, and ultimately more human picture of the past. And it kind of leaves you with one last thought, doesn't it? We are all travelers passing through our own time. If you were to write down an account of your world today, your routines, your beliefs, the things you find weird or wonderful, what story would it tell? What unique lens would you be providing for the historians of the future?